Today we're going back to my roots and taking a look at a real-time strategy game that has had more of an impact on me today than I ever expected it to. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the Saturday Strategy Spotlight.
This is over! Charge!
Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my coverage of various different strategy games on the Saturday Strategy Spotlight, a like on this video, a subscription to the channel, and some comments down below letting me know what strategy games you would like to see me cover in this block in the future would be very much appreciated. Thank you all so much. It's Dawn of War Day! I've been wanting to cover Dawn of War on the Saturday Strategy Spotlight since I started this series a few weeks back, and now I finally have the opportunity, and I'm so happy that I do, because Dawn of War, like I said in the intro, has had a greater impact on me than I ever expected that it would. What is Dawn of War? Dawn of War is a small series of real-time strategy games based in the universe of Warhammer 40,000. If you're not familiar with Warhammer 40K, it's the war is eternal, grim, dark, nothing ever changes, every faction is maybe not as bad as the next, but definitely not good, except for maybe the one good guy faction, even then they're kind of not great. It's just a ton of fun. It's got a ton of very expansive lore, really brutal combat, very deep introspective character moments trying to figure out how they're going to survive and what the purpose of their lives even is in this terrible world, and just a lot of fun, interesting concepts, playing with the ideas of what will the future look like 40,000 years from now, with humanity technically on top of the galaxy, but really not in a great spot as they're doing it. It's a very dark sci-fi setting, and I first learned about it in the Dawn of War games. The original Dawn of War came out in 2004. I got my hands on it a few years after that, when one day my dad randomly brought home the Silver Collection of Dawn of War that came with Dawn of War, its first expansion, Winter Assault, and its second expansion, Dark Crusade, which is what you're going to be seeing footage of here today. The base game features a campaign where you play as the typical Space Marines of the Imperium of Man, the supposed good guys, the face characters at least of the entire franchise, as you go on a campaign on a world that is slowly being taken over by orcs and the forces of chaos, while having the machinations of the Eldar working on it as well. Orcs in this setting are they're very different. They're big and green and scary. They're fungus. They're also psychic, and because they're psychic, whatever they collectively as a group kind of believe is going to happen is typically what's going to happen. The typical example that everyone should probably know, if you have any familiarity with this franchise, is if an orc paints their car or buggy or bike or whatever red, it'll go faster. Because according to orcs, reds make it go faster. And then because everyone agrees with that, lo and behold, it goes faster. They've got this sort of like Londoner, low-class kind of vibe going on. They love a good scrap. They love to get out there and crump some heads and just have a good time. They're very entertaining faction. The Eldar are basically just space elves. They have a lot of really cool lore to them. They're, as you can probably imagine, very much attached to the overall lore of the entire universe in Warhammer 40K. Like, if it weren't for the Eldar, things would be nowhere near what they are today. They're in a classic sort of declining species vibe, but still very imperious and have a major superiority complex over all the other races, and they like to stick their fingers in and meddle with things where they don't belong. And then, of course, Chaos is demons and traitors and hellspawn and cultists and all that kind of typical fantasy sci-fi setting enemy type shtick. But they do have a lot of interesting stuff going on as well. As far as the Imperium of Man is concerned, it's the Imperium of Man. It's mankind 40,000 years in the future, as led by the God Emperor of Mankind, who's a figure we are not going to be talking about beyond this statement today, because we just do not have time to, although I definitely could go on a whole diatribe about the Emperor. But it's armored men, tin cans, as people say, genetically enhanced super soldiers, supplemented by your more typical guardsmen, boots on the ground, modern day style soldiers, going around and desperately trying to hold off attacks from like 18 different directions, as every single faction worth its salt wants to take a piece out of the Imperium for itself. That's the general idea of the setting, and the base campaign just takes you through a story in that setting featuring the Blood Ravens chapter of the Space Marines. Going into Winter Assault, you follow the Imperial Guard, actually, as they are trying to take back a super weapon on an ice world while they have to deal with, again, the Eldar, the Orcs, and Chaos. However, there's a secret faction that comes in at the end known as the Necrons. And if you're familiar with the channel, you're familiar with me, you know I'm kind of into Necrons, and I'm actually working on building a Necron army in the physical minigame right now. We'll talk about that in a second. Finally, getting on to Dark Crusade, this is my favorite aspect of Dawn of War. It is the expansion that I have put the most time into, and rather than featuring a linear story campaign, it's actually a sort of Risk-style battle map, wherein you and every other faction in the game is duking it out, trying to take the entire map for yourself. As you go, you'll be able to unlock upgrades for your commander to put new weapons, armor, abilities, etc. on them, and each region of the map that you take will unlock something different for you. Some of them will give you a special honor guard version of one of your normal units that you can then bring into battle with you free of charge. Some of them will make it so that you have access to different special abilities, like the ability to move twice in one turn, or to attack squares that aren't directly adjacent to where your commander is. Fun stuff like that. And the factions will attack each other as well. Like, it's not just you fighting everybody. They'll go after each other. And in some campaigns, you could wind up seeing a faction get wiped out by another faction before you even ever have the chance to fight them. It's pretty cool. Each faction does have a major story mission when you go and attack their home world, or like their home base, where you actually have a much more elaborate map with actual story, cutscenes, events that take place, story developments, all that type of fun stuff. And I've played through this for every single race in the game. We're talking the Space Marines, Chaos, Imperial Guard, Eldar, Orcs, Tau, Necrons. Yeah, I've played through it a lot. There's a lot to do, and it's been an extremely enjoyable experience. As far as the actual gameplay is concerned, it's fairly typical real-time strategy fare, but definitely flavored for Warhammer 40K, drawing inspiration from the Tabletop Minis war game that is the origination point for Warhammer 40K. If you didn't know, quick aside, that is the whole idea of 40K. It's a huge franchise with books and games and online shorts and small animated series and all sorts of other fun stuff, but the core of the game is plastic, or back in the day, metal minis that people paint up, design, build an army all their own in one of the factions, and then use the very expansive and complicated rules to fight other players on actual battle maps, on actual terrain that they get set up. It's a really cool time. I've got very little experience with it thus far, but I am working on putting an army together so that I can start playing the tabletop mini game. I played one tester game. It was a ton of fun. I can't wait to get into it. And now, having played and started to learn what the actual mechanics of the tabletop game are, I have an appreciation for what the RTS games have done to try and get some of that flavor in there more than ever before. When you drop into any sort of campaign or mission in a Dawn of War game, you'll see it's definitely a dated experience at this point. The graphics are very 2004. If you're playing on a modern system, you have weird issues with resolution and things feeling like they're very zoomed in. There's some mods you can install to make that a smoother experience. I didn't worry about that for getting footage for this video. But you have your standard RTS fare. You've got a home base, maybe like a power generator, maybe like a basic troop building if you're lucky. If it's a multiplayer mission, you've got just your command center, a worker, and your commander, and that's it. From there, you'll go through all the standard steps. Build a basic troop construction building, build a basic upgrade building that will let you get modifications for your troops, put down power generators so you can get energy. Now, what gets interesting is to get your primary resource and requisition, you have to take different zones that you actually have to spend time with a troop unit to capture and then defend. And the more of these that you have, the faster you'll get requisition and the faster you'll be able to get bigger and better things. To do this, you'll have to go to any of them scattered around the map, have a troop that's capable of capturing it, work on capturing it for a set period of time, defend them while they do that, as they cannot defend themselves, and then once you've captured the point, start building fortifications directly on top of it. First, just a command post that's going to be able to block attacks and give you vision. Then those command posts will get turrets and the like so that they can defend themselves a little bit. And then you'll probably want to build up defenses around it or have units stationed to try and protect it if it's something that's likely to be on the front line and contested by the enemy. This makes it very important to push out and expand and come into conflict with other various players on the map, kind of in the way that you would if you were trying to expand really fast in something like StarCraft 2 and start building a new base. But these command posts are scattered all over the map. You'll see units running hither and yon, trying to capture them and fighting over them. This leans into the idea that in the 41st millennium, there is only war, as the tagline for the entire series goes. You are very quickly going to have even your most basic of troops starting to duke it out, and using your commander unit, whatever it happens to be, to get an early advantage and deny your enemy command points is going to be extremely valuable. I'm sure it's probably just nostalgia talking, but getting back in and playing a few maps in Dark Crusade to get footage for this video, I was immediately having such a good time. It's a simpler time of gaming where you're just getting in, going, building up your army, trying to strategize, counter what the enemy is doing, make sure you're getting your resources online as quickly and efficiently as possible. No real BS, which I really enjoy. As you start to get your squads upgraded, this is where you're going to see more of that kind of Warhammer 40K-ness, as especially when you're playing things like Space Marines, you have to upgrade the squad over time. You don't just get a full complement of guys, or even just one guy when you build a troop of units. You get a troop. For Space Marines, you start with 4 Marines in a squad, and then you can use more requisition to recruit more men into that squad up to a maximum of 8 for just your basic troop. From there, you can wind up getting an upgrade that lets you get a sergeant. That adds, obviously, more damage to the squad, but also gives them more morale, which is something we'll talk about in a second. And then various different weapon upgrades to specialize them for different roles. Not every faction can do this, but a lot of them can, and especially the Space Marines are known for having a lot of tactical options for being ready for pretty much any situation, and this is how you can see that. You can get things like plasma rifles that burn through armored targets, or you can get things like flamers that are going to do a lot of damage to infantry and break their morale. Heavy bolters that allow you to attack from entrenched positions from range and deal a lot of damage to lightly armored targets. And then rocket launchers so you can deal with heavily armored things like vehicles that aren't just like heavy armor infantry, which is where you want your plasma gun. Getting different squads set up with different loadouts is a ton of fun. I really enjoy that aspect. And seeing actually how their models change and how their combat style changes, because it does, is a ton of fun, especially for a game that's definitely on the older side at this point. You also have things like cover. It's not super involved in this game, but you can see as you scroll around the map, your cursor will actually change to indicate if you are going down into something like a ditch that will give you cover, or maybe something like difficult terrain that's going to make it so you can't take cover and you're taking more damage. It's never come up overly much for me in the campaigns when I'm playing them, but I imagine if you were someone who played a lot of multiplayer back in the day, there was probably a good aspect of making sure that your units are taking cover, trying to force your enemies into bad cover, and that's another aspect of the tabletop game as well. You definitely want cover when you're playing with your minis on the tabletop against a human opponent, because boy howdy, your guys will get blasted off the map extremely quickly if you leave them standing out in the open. As far as morale is concerned, this is another system that is important based off of the way that the tabletop game functions. Essentially, it changed a lot throughout the editions, but as a troop of units takes damage, loses fighting strength, etc., different aspects will happen to them. Sometimes you just lose damage, sometimes you lose the ability to take points, sometimes you lose the ability to actually use your special abilities as the commander on your targets. That's Battle Shock, as it is in 10th edition currently. In Dawn of War, it's just strictly a damage debuff. If a squad's morale is broken, they're going to basically deal next to no damage and take a lot more damage, and potentially move more slowly as well. So it's really not a situation that you want to wind up being in. Having abilities that restore morale, prevent morale from being broken in the first place, having weapons that break enemies' morale. It's a big aspect of the game, and it's something that you definitely want to be considering in terms of what your combat strategy is, not just how much raw damage output can I put out, because there are some units that really just won't take damage until you break their morale. As you progress, you'll keep building more buildings, more bases, and eventually complete one of the objectives that's going to allow you to win the game. Sometimes that's just destroying all the enemy HQs, sometimes that's capturing the most number of command points, sometimes there's a critical point that you need to fight over and hold, and then once you hold it long enough, you take the win. There's a bunch of different ways that you can win. It's pretty typical for real-time strategy games of the time, and it's just a ton of fun. I love this game so much. There's a very wide variety of units that you can utilize, even just in each faction, let alone once you start looking at all the factions combined, and it's a pretty good representation of the diversity of races and combat styles in 40K. Like, you got your tactical Space Marines who are good at a bit of everything, but don't really have one thing that they're particularly strong at. You've got Chaos Space Marines that are kind of the same, a little bit weaker because of their mutations and abnormalities and things like that, but on the flip side, get to be able to use things like demons and magic and things that the typical Space Marines don't get to use. The Imperial Guard are just overwhelming force by numbers, as well as really heavy artillery, very real-world style combat in what is otherwise a very sci-fi setting. The LR have a lot of tricky, high-speed glass cannon units that can deal a lot of damage and get in, get out, but get crushed if they get cornered. The Orcs also, a lot of swarm tactics, guys that get really tough over time. The longer the game goes on, the stronger that the Orcs get. They start out kind of weak, but if you can survive, you can get them dug in and make a position for yourself and get some of the better units online. They become terrifying. Also very versatile. They have a lot of looted gear that gives them a lot of different versatility in terms of what they're capable of. The Tau are your futuristic, almost like Asian-inspired Gundam aesthetic species that has a lot, and I mean a lot, of ranged capability. They are the shooting army. They have very minimal melee capabilities due to their allied races that they bring into battle with them. But if you just want some extremely high firepower, long-range laser rifles with mecha suits that are going to bombard things from a distance with fire and missiles and plasma barrages, then Tau's where you want to be. And then finally, you have my boys, the Necrons. The Necrons are awesome. They're definitely overpowered in Dark Crusade, but so it goes. It's fine. This is your undead necromancy faction, except it's sci-fi, so now they're mechanical skeletons that can resurrect themselves, put themselves together on the battlefield, get back up. And they have this really awesome pseudo-Egyptian theme going on with these giant black stone monoliths and scarabs that they use to build things. And their armor kind of has that Egyptian vibe going on. And they are really hard to bring down. Then they can get themselves back up. They deal a ton of damage with their Gauss and Flare technology, and they're very, very slow to get going as the Empire reawakens, but once they do, my lord, good luck, because they are going to run over you. They're able to summon star gods. They've got crazy amalgamations of what once were men, or, well, Necron tier, strapped into hover engines that turn them into living tanks. They're just super cool. They don't talk, they don't care, they don't have diplomacy. They're just coming to get you off their lawn. And that's one of the things that makes Dawn of War as a series of games so fun to me. There's such a diverse range of armies that you can play, and even if you don't have a ton of different play styles within them, you have some. There's just so many different ways to address different types of matchups, and I miss that from RTS games that have a fewer number of factions. I know that's hard to balance, and I know if you're looking at competitive things, you want a more narrow focus of a few really well-balanced, real-designed races that are going to be very good at countering each other and have a lot of interplay with each other. But from just I want to get in and play a war game and see what happens as I build out an army and try and figure out my strategy, it's just so much fun. That's why I love the Dark Crusade campaign so much, because it's like, okay, yeah, playing through a linear campaign, seeing the story, seeing the character moments, like, that's fun. But with this, I can replay this as many different times as I want, and it really kind of is similar, in a way, to playing the tabletop war game in real life. They did a really, really good job of capturing that atmosphere, and I respect it all the more now that I've actually learned a lot more about the lore of 40K and the way the tabletop minigame functions than I ever could have possibly known when I first started playing this. As far as I was concerned, back when I first started playing Dawn of War in like 2007, 2008, I didn't know this was a world. I didn't know this was a franchise. I thought that this was all that Warhammer 40K was for the longest time. And then Space Marine came out, Dawn of War 2 came out. I started looking at things on the internet as the internet became more expansive and accessible, and realized, no, there's a lot more to this. And I started having dreams of actually building tabletop armies and being able to play with people and all that type of fun stuff. And now I finally get to, but these are the humble origins of that. If you haven't had the chance, you're a fan of real-time strategy games, and you don't mind a little bit of jank, especially this being an older game on new systems, then I do recommend checking out the Dawn of War games. They're very cheap on Steam at this point. They're a ton of fun, and frankly, if you're at all interested in the world of Warhammer 40K, I think it's a pretty decent place to start. Like, there's a lot of lore that has changed. Yes, the Necrons are functionally very different in their background, history, and lore than they are now in the modern era compared to what they were in Dawn of War. There's been a lot of changes to different types of units and the way different factions function and things like that. But overall, it gives you a great high-level, broad view of what 40K has to offer, what its setting is like, what a lot of the major players are, what its overall atmosphere and vibe is as this space gothic sci-fi, almost Lovecraftian horror in a lot of ways, energy that it brings to the table. Things that I love and the blending that the overall universe has, and I think a lot of you will enjoy as well. It's a very, very, very cool universe, but you need a good entry point, because there's hundreds of books. There's 10 different editions of the game that all have different lore and different aspects to them. There's people who've been playing the tabletop version of the game since it first came out 25, 30 years ago, who are super entrenched and are not going to be able to give you a good base level view of what's going on. There's so many different games now. Like I said, there's all of the online web shorts and animations and things. Having one concise place to enter is ideal. And if you don't have a friend who's willing to kind of shepherd you through that intro experience and help you learn about this franchise without getting in way over your head, I think something like Dawn of War is a very, very good entry point. So I would highly recommend that you check it out if you are at all interested. As far as how the game has aged, again, visually, it's definitely a little rough around the edges, but it is still really a lot of fun to play. There's some annoying aspects, like pathfinding for individual units is a nightmare, as it pretty much always was with real-time strategy games back in the day. But the moment-to-moment gameplay, the building up of your forces, the actual start of combat, figuring out what types of units that you need to deploy where to counter what the enemy is deploying, how you can upgrade your squads to maximize your efficiency, what areas of the map you're going to be able to safely expand to take more command points, to get more requisition, or if you're going to accidentally overextend yourself. It still has a lot of teeth, and with all the fan mods that there are, all the expansions to add whole races from the tabletop game that were not in this game to the game, with custom models, custom voice lines, all sorts of reworks to units, modifications to rules that make it even more like a tabletop game. There's a ton of life that you can find here if it winds up catching your fancy. So again, check it out. I think the game is held up pretty dang well. And I'd like to cover Dawn of War 2 on the Saturday Strategy Spotlight as well. So let me know in the future if you would like to see that. And let me know what you thought about this episode. I know we haven't done real-time strategy games before, but it is strategy. It does fall under that pantheon of game style, of genre, and it is something that I love, so I wanted to cover it here. If you've played a lot of Dawn of War or a lot of 40K in your time, let me know down in the comments below. I would love to be able to chat with y'all about it, especially if it comes down to mini painting and advice for that, because, I mean, I'm getting deep into that, and I would love to have people to chat with about it. Join the Discord. Maybe we can start up a channel or something there just for mini painting. We'll have to see. But with all that said, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you to my lovely patrons and my lovely YouTube members for the support that you give the channel. You can see them all scrolling by here on the right side of the screen. It would be way harder to do this without you guys. Relying on solely ad revenue and being able to pick up different sponsors and things, it's very hit or miss. It's very feast or famine. So having a little bit of a reliable through line with your guys' direct support makes this so much easier and quells my anxiety massively. So thank you for that. If you're interested in joining as a patron or a member for the channel, links to both of those can be found in the description. Please do consider doing so if you have a little bit of spare money and you want to support a local creator that you enjoy the content of. That said, though, that's enough rambling from me. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. The Emperor protects.